The special workshop to talk about the charter will begin. I'm sorry, one of our council people will wait. Hold on just one moment.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, you're gonna have to run a lap. This is the Marines now. You gotta run a couple of laps.
I'm calling to order the meeting for the city council to discuss our charter. Sherry, do we have to take a roll?
Mayor Miller?
Here.
Vice Mayor Lindauer?
Present.
Councilmember Bryant?
Here.
Councilmember Frislow?
Yes.
Councilmember Politis is probably running late.
All right. Do we want to are you okay getting started? Or do you want to wait a couple of minutes?
We can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
And then we'll bring the council member up to speed.
Okay, great.
So get a little feedback. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wade Vose. I'm the managing partner of the Vose Law Firm, and glad to be here with you all today to work with you all as you work through discussing what potential changes to your city charter that you may decide to put before the voters. I'm sorry. Does it normally ring that much?
You're good.
Is it good? All right. Yeah.
Yeah, you sound okay. David, does it sound all right there to you?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll stand.
I hear the ring that you're hearing.
Yeah, I know it's ringing back, but it's fine. I'll just stand a little bit further back. Just to give you all a little bit of background and understanding in my experience in working with councils and commissions on charters, I've had the pleasure of serving as general counsel for 6 different county charter review commissions in 5 different counties throughout the state. I've served as general counsel for the Orange County Charter Review Commission in 2011, 2012, and in 15-16 for the Brevard County Charter Review Commission in 15-16, for the Pinellas County Charter Review Commission on the other side of the state in 15-16, and 17 and 18 for Clay County, and then I just finished up representing the Alachua County Charter Review Commission in representing each of them and coming up with county charter amendments that they would propose to their counties. In addition to that, I've had the opportunity to serve as counsel to either charter review committees or city councils or commissions or both in cities throughout the state of Florida, with the city of Cocoa Beach, the city of Brooksville, the city of Bunnell, the town of Pearson here in Volusia County, the village of Indiantown, and most recently I was actually engaged as outside counsel for the city of Bradenton to help them rewrite substantial portions of their charter. So what we're going to be doing today, if it's all right with you all, and ultimately this is going to be a process that's going to be driven by your interests and desires and what work you want to accomplish and what you eventually want to decide to put in front of the voters. But I'm going to give you some suggestions based on the experience I've had and just ways that I have found have worked out exceedingly well in helping zero in on what it is you want to propose as changes and what it is that you can ask your city attorney's office to drill down into the weeds and make certain things happen. You'll notice I mentioned the voters a number of times, okay? As opposed to ordinances or resolutions, any other type of legislative activity you all would be engaged in, any of the work that would come out of the city council in proposing municipal charter amendments is going to have to be summarized into one or more ballot questions, ballot summaries that are going to go on the ballot and ultimately be voted on by the voters of the city. There are some parameters that go into that, and it's important to lay them out now just so you understand kind of the constraints we're working in formulating these charter amendments that you may ultimately decide on. When we put these different issues on the ballot, we're going to have to come up with a ballot summary, all right? Which for each of those issues, it's going to be a summary of a title of up to 15 words and a ballot question of up to 75 words that is going to accurately, without any sort of bias or kind of political language in it, accurately explain what it is you're changing in the charter. Okay, now why is this relevant to talk about at this point? It's important for a couple reasons. First, to focus on the fact that it really lends itself to a number of single policy changes. If you want to fundamentally change X, Y, or Z within the charter, the way I tend to recommend it is we break it down into those individual issues. While it is technically permissible to log roll multiple issues, basically make it not be single subject, I strongly advise against it. You never get anything good out of log rolling different issues on a charter amendment. You usually just get pushback from your voters, which is not something you necessarily want to get into. At the same time, if you have some minor procedural changes, things like that, things that can be summarized in a general way and aren't going to raise too much fuss, we can put those together. Those generally will, if we do our work right, consist of a single subject that we can explain adequately to the voters and then move on from there. A lot of this is going to make more sense. Oh, yes.
The whole thing would not have to go on the ballot?
Oh, no, it would still have to go on the ballot.
Be able to explain it in an easier way if it's just simple.
Correct. And
Is that your point? I'm not.
It is, and it depends on the type of simple, okay? One thing I strongly recommend against, if you all saw my email that I sent out earlier, is your charter overall is a well-put-together charter. And I say that having read a lot of charters that haven't been touched since the 1920s, literally, or have rank inconsistencies in them. You know, between any two paragraphs, you have fundamental problems, or you have spelling and grammatical problems that just make it a complete mess, where you just need to toss the whole thing out and rewrite it. That's not what I see when I see this chart. I would suggest that the primary thing you all may be focusing on is not necessarily going through word for word and changing happy to glad, as I mentioned in my email before, but focusing on any sort of fundamental change you would want to make in the structure of your government. That's really, in the end, what a municipal charter is for, setting up the fundamental structure of your government, those things that are so important that they be in there, that they can only be changed by the voters. And setting those up in such a way, or removing things. If you don't believe they should be in the charter, the best dealt with by ordinance and so on. And then we focus on those individual issues. That's going to make it a lot easier for the voters to understand, and then for them to be able to make an appropriate choice or adequate choice when they're in the ballot box. So that's kind of my little overview on all of this. Consistent with my email that I had sent out before, I would suggest that your discussion amongst yourselves and with me will be focused on, after having reviewed the charter, read the charter, what sort of things, if any, you think need to be changed, added, changed, or removed from the charter. And we can really kind of come up with a list and see where there is an appetite for certain things. If there's interest from one council member but not from others, it's ultimately your decision making, how you want to proceed with regard to any of that. But we take all that into appropriate account as we move forward. And after we get all those different issues out on the table, we'll have the opportunity to drill down into the particulars, understand where you're trying to go with it, and then from that, my office can have the work to take that and put it into some language that we can bring back to you for you to look at and see if it adequately reflects the policy direction you all want to go and suggest to the voters. And then when we get further down the line, we would be coming up with initial ballot language that we would bring back to you all to take a look at. On that, though, I will tell you it's very, you're very important to that process, as well as a gut check, if you will, all right? Lawyers tend to write like lawyers, and that's a problem sometimes, okay? And I've written a lot of ballot language. I've written ballot language that's been on ballots all over the state. But sometimes I will tell you, I will write it, and somebody sitting on a dais like this will say, "Nice try, Wade, but you missed," because it sounds too much like a lawyer. And so we back up and we will fool around with it and get it so that we feel a voter can feel comfortable voting on that. So,
So what is your intent today? I just wanted to understand our structure today. Were you planning on going through the current charter with us, or do you want us, because we've read it in advance, tell you what issues we have? It was,
my recommendation, and again, if your view or however you want to direct has a desire otherwise to go through in order, we can. But quite frankly, I've found it to be more productive for you all to focus on having read it. What changes do you, or what needs for change do you see there, and then getting those out on the table? Because going through paragraph by paragraph, I think invites more happy to glad changes, as opposed to getting down to the meat of, these are the 4 things we need to change, something like that.
and what we currently have right now, you've gone through, so there's nothing that we have in our current charter that is in conflict with state statute. Is that correct?
Well, there are a few things.
You want to start with that or not? That was just a question I had.
Yeah.
I second the second starting point as well. That starting point N, is there anything that you see in similar cities in the area? I mean, you've rattled off, I mean, where you look at something and say, whoa, that's different from X, Y, and Z. I know ultimately it's up to us, but given that we have other like cities that have charters, do you see anything that kind of sets your hair on fire, or that you would point us in the right direction to take a look at?
Sure. And again, this really comes down to if you don't mind, I'm going to jump to that one first, and then
Sure, no problem.
stew on that first one a little bit, because I'm not going to tell you anything in here is illegal as such. There's a tune-up or two that could be had. One thing I'll tell you, commonly you will find in charters is they will try to restate Florida law badly. Okay, they'll try to summarize a whole, long statute or a whole body of case law into 2 or 3 sentences, and it just begs for trouble. We might get into a little bit of that, but
You can start with Councilman Frizzalone's, yes. Anything that sees blatant, like, why did you do it that way?
well, yeah, and anything I point out along these lines, and actually let me just mention this one last thing. We have no interest or concern in policy, other than the policy you all want to put out there, okay? But to the question of things that I don't commonly see in other charters, one that I saw, and there's actually towards the end, it's 7.08, and it may be one you desperately want to have.
Did you say 708?
7.08 in Article
Bids and
7,
contracts.
that's bids, contracts, and expenditures. It is not common, in my experience, to have restrictions directly in your charter with regard to how and when things go out to bid, all right? It's much more common that just in my experience, that you would see that in a procurement ordinance or a procurement policy that would be developed and approved by the council.
I'm the slow one in the group. Can you explain what you just?
Sure, not a problem. So I'll start from the basics of Florida law, all right? In the absence of a couple different types of purchasing, it's when the government's spending money to buy either a good or a service or something like this. In the absence of particular statutes, and the couple being how you procure engineering services, that's covered by a statute called the CCNA, how you procure construction contracts over a certain threshold, you have to put it out to bid and check all these boxes and so on. How you procure an auditor, another statute. There's a number of different statutes say for particular things, but in the absence of that, municipalities can purchase goods and services any way that is reasonable and as they see fit, okay? Now, the common way that municipalities deal with that is they will not just say, all right, well, we're not putting anything out to bid except what the state statute requires. We'll just go willy-nilly, do whatever we want. Commonly, they develop a procurement or purchasing ordinance, all right, that gets into the weeds, because there are a lot of different types of contracts, and there might be different ways you want to handle different things at different times. Sometimes going out to bid might always make sense for this type of thing. Sometimes it might be, you know, something of such a unique nature that you want to drill down on one particular vendor, and they're just the guys you've got to go with.
Talking about RFPs now?
Correct. Yeah, when we're, RFP, request for proposals, or request for bids, or request for quotes, request for qualifications, all these different types of purchasing or procurement activities, okay?
What do we do different than everybody else? I still not getting it.
In your charter, and again, I couldn't tell you as a practical matter, and the city manager may be able to give you more boots on the ground insight as to the extent in practice how this might tie your hands at all.
And not, so A, B, C, or D, do you have, not an issue, but you want to call it to our attention, all of these, or one of these in particular?
So let's take a look.
And when you say hamstringing, you think that we're hamstringing the city manager by putting restrictions on him that others don't?
Or removing requirements, either one.
And Wade, could I take the clerk and explain it so maybe you'll understand it? He's just saying these restrictions are not typically in a charter, they're in an ordinance.
Typically, everything doesn't have to come to, every contract wouldn't have to come to the city attorney, and I'll use an example that my finance director gave me yesterday. Phone contracts, for example. Every time you get a new phone, you have to sign a new contract. That's a boilerplate type thing, that there's no way the city attorney needs to review every phone contract, and they're not going to change phone contracts based on Wade's review or John's review anyway, because it's a boilerplate type thing. So in that sense, yeah, it handcuffs a little bit. So if we could change that, that would probably be a good thing.
And previously, Mike, refresh my memory, one of our previous attorneys wanted it drilled down so low that when we had a yoga instructor at the community center, they wanted to review that contract.
In 1999, the threshold was $100. And everything over $100 had to come to city council. And we were getting these long lists every month of things, every time everybody used a purchasing card, anything like that. So when they did the charter review in 2000, 2001, that's when they upped it to the $25,000 threshold as opposed to the $100 threshold, which was reasonable at the time, and probably is still pretty reasonable, to be honest.
So is it that $25,000 that you have a problem with, Wade, or I'm still not exactly understanding?
And let me jump in. I don't have a problem with any of this. I'm being crystal clear.
All right.
I have we don't care, one way or another. I'm answering your question to the.
Can I just say something? I'm not okay with that. I mean, with all due respect, I mean, you're here as an expert, and you have much more expertise than certainly the five of us do at what other people do. So what I'm asking again is that I do want you to care. I do. Do you see anything whereby you would direct the five of us that says, hey, I've got more experience than any of you do, and here's what I see other councils doing that you're not doing, and I want to direct your attention to this.
Sure.
Because I do care what you think. I don't want you to just throw up your hands and say, I don't care. I do care what you think.
I understand. All I was saying is I don't want to put
I
a
get that.
finger on
I get it.
that here, because you guys are the decision makers.
I get it.
But, so actually, let me break up two issues here real quick, all right? There's the issue of what we review or not, that's a separate issue. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about your requirement here as to what has to, except for this very short list here, everything else has to go out to the lowest responsive bidder, and has to be advertised and all of these things. That is not a common procedure that you find specified in your charter, okay? And all that means is you as the city, you as the city council don't have the opportunity to flesh out further where those exceptions may be and so on, because they're locked in stone, and they can only be changed by the voters. Now, again, the reason why I try not to put my finger on any of this, because this may have been put in here because of some things in the past, and it was felt to be very important to do so. But it is atypical, and more typical that it would be defined by ordinance that's ultimately under the control of the city council.
All right, so again, are you saying we're giving up too much responsibility or not taking enough? Can you define it that way compared to another city?
Sure. Your having it in the charter ties the city council's hands too much to say in every single instance except these discrete instances, it's ultimately tying your hands to be able to not add more exceptions to this list of things that you think the most appropriate way to procure something would be something different than set forth here.
Can you give any example of another city, at a high level, what theirs might look like?
Basically a much, I'm thinking of a couple different ones here, whereas there's 4 different categories of things that are procured by alternative means, then, being put out to bid, they might have a list of categories of 12 different types, a number of them which would not be subsumed in any of this. I also don't know, John, you may be able to tell me, how much piggybacking do we do here in light of this provision?
Quite a bit,
Okay.
state and county, and other cities.
And again, I'm going to plead ignorant. Can you explain to me how much, when you say how much piggybacking, can you explain to me what that means? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding that.
Sure. So, very common, and I'm sorry to get so far in the weeds. So
That's okay.
This is what happens sometimes. So piggybacking is is a common concept you find in procurement policies, procurement ordinances, that says when another government has gone through a substantially similar bid process to what you would require in your ordinance or in your policies, and they've gone through and bid it out, and they've come to their decision as who is best for procuring this particular service or good, then another government can come in and not have to go through their own bid process. Say, hey, they did a good job bidding that. Very common with the state. State does state bids and so on.
So is that not to interrupt you? So we're thinking about buying 2 new police vehicles. So that would be an example of that.
Perfect example that you would usually buy that through the state sheriff's contract. Yeah.
That's exactly. Okay.
So that's an example of piggybacking. And so, again, help me out. So we've read this provision here to be consistent with piggybacking.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question, Mike? It seems like a far jump from $100 to $25,000. How did we get to that number?
I believe at the time, $100 was deemed to be a little bit too low because, we
I agree.
buy stuff every day. that's
Yeah, I agree.
$100. How the 25 was arrived at, I'm not sure. I mean, I've been in other cities where it was
$100,000 because you may be buying stuff for electric utility. I mean, if you have to buy a transformer, you're not going to get a transformer, a bigger one for $25,000. You're going to spend 50, 60, 70. But here, I felt that 25 was much more appropriate, maybe, than say 100,000 or some outrageous number.
But in the case of a transformer, wouldn't we be going out for bid anyway?
Well, we would, yes. But when I mentioned previous city, we would not have had to go out for a bid because sometimes you have to have those items, pretty quick. You don't have time to have a council meeting. You don't have time to do that. Here, I don't see that as a problem. So 25 is probably a good number to have.
If I can jump in real quick, the issue to me here is whether this discussion should be happening in light of something that you can take care of by either ordinance or by amending the procurement policy versus it being set in stone in the city charter tying your hands. And that's the real issue here is we run the risk. We've got a 95% page procurement policy that Kurt keeps, and that tells us everything we would need to know or consider when we do the purchasing. And to the extent that it may be, that you could amend that but for the city charter. You may want to consider in the future making it $50,000 limit, for example, but because it's in the charter, you can't. So this would be an opportunity to get rid of a provision, if this is the will of the council to do so, that really doesn't belong in the charter at all. And I liken it kind of to the pregnant pigs in the Florida Constitution. You remember 27 years ago, they amended the Constitution to include provision on pregnant pigs, and a lot of the discussion was, well, that's not really an issue that belongs in the Constitution, because the Constitution should be about the structure and nature of our government and our rights and whatnot. The charter is kind of the same way. You don't really want the nuts and bolts, typically, of this kind of issue in the charter when it could be in the ordinances or the procurement policy.
So Attorney Carey, are you saying that the purchasing and contracts should be enacted by ordinance?
Yes,
Yeah,
That would be typical.
it
yes.
sounds like we should consider taking 708 out altogether, is that correct?
That would be consistent with.
And you don't lose control over purchasing by doing that. You get more control because then you can set the policy year to year rather than setting the policy once every 10 years when you do charter review.
I think that makes sense to me.
I think John said it better than I.
Okay, so the suggestion is that we take 708 out completely, all 4 caveats there, and do purchasing and contracts by ordinance?
Yes.
Would we write that in there then, Wade? 708, would we state that all purchasing and contracts are by ordinance?
It would be regulated by ordinance. It would probably, put it to you this way, in a very practical matter, probably make it a lot easier to get it passed by the electorate. And here's why. If you just said removing restrictions on procurement, from the charter, they'll say, hey, they can spend whatever you want. If you instead say, removing those provisions and providing that it'll be, regulated by ordinance, then the voters will at least have assurance that it's going to be regulated.
We would still have eyes on it.
Exactly. There should be regulated by something. It's not legally necessary that it say that. That's an inherent home rule power of yours to regulate that. But in this instance, I'd probably recommend that you.
All right, and then after we do that, by ordinance, could we say, city manager or finance director, whoever, up to $25,000?
You could re-implement this exact stuff, and I imagine it already is, implemented precisely in your current procurement policy. So
Okay.
it wouldn't necessarily make any substantive change at all. It would just be, where is it, and how much are your hands tied in the future in case you, in your wisdom, thought you need to make a change.
And we can change that number very easily by ordinance.
No, I think that's a good suggestion, and actually say in the charter, it will be regulated by ordinance.
So is everybody on board? I mean, how do we handle that? Do you have any thoughts, Michael?
Well, I think that Attorney Voss is going to take us through a whole bunch of what recommendations he has, and I guess we could have a general consensus if we all agree, or whether we need to further discuss it. But I'm on board for this because it's 6 or 1/2 dozen what we're doing, but with doing the procurement ordinances, we have a little bit more discretion, a little bit more leeway to amend, shuck and jive with the times, whereas, like we said, with the charter, you're limited in what you can do. So by eliminating it, it'll be one of the items we're going to stick on that ballot anyway.
I agree.
So I think we're going to have a few more other things coming up as well.
Attorney Voss, did you tell me there was a limit to how many we could put on?
There's not. There's a limit in how many words we have to explain each one. Now, I will tell you, start putting on 15 to 20, we will get grumbles from the Volusia County Supervisor of Elections Office. If we make them,
Or Lisa, huh?
if we make them have to print extra pages, then that's when we start getting grumbles. But
All right,
Is there any requirement on the type of election, or type of?
there is not, actually. These charter amendments, municipal charter amendments can be placed on any ballot. They can be placed on, pre-existing ballot that's being scheduled. It can be placed on a special election called for that purpose. So you could have a special election. Of course, that would cost us money.
the special election would cost
I
me.
can tell you from experience with the Volusia County with the Volusia County Supervisor of Elections Office, as well as others, that will cost us to have a special election.
And there's a difference between if you had them come in person or mail out or whatever, depending on the cost, okay.
So-
And you can do charter amendments by mail ballot
Yeah.
as well. But it's not actually always cheaper to do that. Most of the time it is, but it's not always.
Because I had asked Lisa Lewis to give us a ballpark number, and she just assumed the mail-in ballot to come up with a number. And there's no legal restriction as to what kind of balloting you actually do.
That's correct. Yeah, charter amendment can be by the mail ballot statute.
And just for the council's information, it looks like on the ballpark, it was about $7,000.
Okay, and what would define to me if we see something, I guess we've had this last one for how long? Do we see something that's of utmost urgency, that we need a special ballot, and I guess we'd have to decide that, or can we wait? It would be 2022.
2022, yeah. And
August or November?
either one, whichever you'd prefer. There wouldn't be a presidential preference primary then, so no March. So you could choose to put it on the August or put it on November. Your regular city election will be in November, though, so you may choose to just put it on consistent with that. So
I mean, we can decide that, but yeah, I think we'd have to go through here and for me to say, oh, we need that changed immediately.
I didn't, from my standpoint, looking at something and saying, oh my goodness, we're going to crash into a wall. I did not see anything looking at this that says you need to rush out and do a mail ballot election tomorrow to fix this.
We can get a $7,000. All right, so did you want us to say what we looked at and what we saw, or where do you want to go?
That's what I would recommend, is after having looked at it, the different issues you all have, suggest bringing them up, discuss them amongst yourselves, discuss it with me, and we can see if we drive in a direction with it.
Okay, Attorney Politis, did you see anything first that you wanted to bring up that?
No, actually, I'm going to yield to Attorney Voss because he's going to kind of guide us as to what needs to be tweaked or what needs to be eliminated or what needs to be added. So I'll yield to him. I went through it and I didn't see anything that was broken.
Okay, Attorney Frizzolo?
I'm going to yield to my fellow council members.
Okay, and I'm not quite understanding this, but the compensation 2.10, and our finance director has explained this to me several times. I'm not saying that we want, to increase the salaries right now, but there was some discrepancy, and Kurt, can you explain to me again about what happened on that? Was it, all we want to do is this is not in line with one of our ordinances, or can you explain it to me again? 2.10, page 7.
Yeah, correct. That was the issue that happened. So prior to my being here, there was an ordinance adopted that set out the method where council member pay and mayor pay was adjusted annually. And it said it needed to be done, I don't remember if it was by resolution or by ordinance. So my first year in adopting the budget stuff, I put a resolution together to change that rate because the ordinance said it needed to be set by resolution. So right before that meeting, the attorney at the time said, well, wait a minute, that's not how we do it. There's a separate section in the charter that at the time I was unaware of. So it became kind of an issue. We pulled the item and it's not been discussed since, but for that ordinance, that basically needs to be deleted because the charter takes precedent. So that ordinance needs to be removed unless you wanted to remove the language in here in the charter and say council pay would be set by ordinance. That's a policy decision for you all to make. We have not done anything with the existing ordinance because the charter overrides it. So even though it's still there, it's irrelevant. Does that answer your question?
That explains it. Wait, do you understand then that I want to make sure that they're both in line?
Sure, and let me throw this out more generally, and this may be one of the examples and so on. I had heard mentioned to me that there were some understood inconsistencies between the charter and the code of ordinances tucked away in it and so on. And you're correct, that the initial reaction is if you've got a charter provision and you have an ordinance that's inconsistent with that, you would amend the ordinance to be consistent with the charter, unless it's your direction, well, we ought to propose a change to the charter, and then you proceed forward with attempting to amend the charter. In any event, though, the charter is going to control over any ordinance until that conflict is
And
resolved.
that's why our finance director had to pull it because of this, correct? Okay, got it. So that's one of the ones I'd like to look at.
Okay, absolutely. And so I will take a look at that ordinance conflicting. Let me ask you all, just straight out from a policy standpoint, which direction you think you want to go right now.
Again, with your expertise, what do you see in the other cities that you
It
see?
is provisions like you see here, very common, that you see two of the elements going on here, that compensation is set, doesn't expressly say it that way here, but basically that compensation is set by ordinance. Obviously, somebody's got to make the decision. It's going to be you all doing it, and they do it by ordinance. And then the other provision in here, that it doesn't take effect, and there's some language that could be tweaked here.
Till the next,
Yeah, it doesn't take effect until after that next election. This has additional protection in here, basically so long as that ordinance was at least some period of time prior to that. I think basically so voters can know you gave yourself an increase or are planning to give yourself an increase right before or what have you. That's the theory. This all comes from an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that famously was proposed back with the Bill of Rights, never got enough ratifying states until, I think, the early 1990s, and then became part of the Constitution. So this actually applies, a similar provision applies to Congress as well.
okay, so is there anything that's covered in the state statute for this?
No. Other than that, the state statute expressly permits, without you having voting conflicts, expressly permits you to vote on your own salaries. But this is a very common provision in this sort here. And if we want to clean this up more, what I'm hearing right, they would clean this up more so that it's crystal clear you're doing it by ordinance and it doesn't take effect until after that next election and so on. I'm seeing a little bit of language here that we might want to tune up and we'd get that ordinance consistent with.
So is that your suggestion, though, that we would do it by ordinance?
Yeah, that you'd have a potentially cleaned up charter provision. So this may be a charter amendment, because I'm seeing some holes in this language based on the conflict. So sometimes there are what we would call latent defects, that only pop out when we hear of a particular application. I'm hearing one now. So I may come back with some recommended tune-ups to this language, but it would keep the general idea of this language. How about that?
All right.
Yeah, in general, this allows you to change by ordinance. And whatever the latent defects are, that would be interesting to know, but if that's what we want to do, is change it by ordinance. It's already in it. It's already in here. And this may be one that will raise a red flag with the voters if we start playing around with giving ourselves raises versus, if we already can do it by ordinance, only there are certain restrictions. But I'm just asking you to maybe look into that. You do agree that we can already do it by ordinance, right?
Yes.
And be consistent with the charter.
Yes.
So,
It's just a particular way I'm reading some of this here might, I'll lay it out there for you. It's this, basically, thought I heard some sort of idea that you could pass an ordinance once and then change it by resolution or anything like that because the ordinance says so.
Why did you have to pull this then, if in fact you could have? I mean, that was before our time, but.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact language, but the ordinance read that it had to be set by resolution, I believe. And so the ordinance just said it could be done annually, and it gave a formula based on a certain number of cities, their average. Sherry had to do an annual call, verify what other councils were doing, and you got an average of that pay. And so there was a very set format, but it also said it had to be adopted by resolution. And part of the issue was the resolution, because I was trying to comply with that ordinance at the same time as budget hearing, it was less than the 90 days, which created another conflict with the charter. So it was just scrapped altogether at that one time. I was simply trying to comply with our ordinance by having a resolution that stated it. But then it got to be a bigger issue with that conflict.
So
This
we definitely
language-
need some cleanup.
Yeah, this language doesn't expressly say that you can only increase your salaries by ordinance. It doesn't.
No, it says you can do it, but not exclusively.
It says you can determine your compensation, and then it puts a restriction, says any ordinance increasing it becomes effective whenever. There's some gaps and holes that are jumping out at me.
You understand where we're coming from, that we want it cleaned up. And
Well, I have a comment. First of all, I'm totally against raising our own salaries, because some of us will be raising our own salary if we get elected or re-elected. I'm wondering whether we can't just set, I don't see this as a place where people come to make money in our pay scale. I would like to see something, or I'd like to suggest something that is automatic, the cost of inflation, the raise, and then nobody has to vote on it. It's already established, the numbers established by the government. We're keeping the pay level in terms of real dollars or spending power based on when you got elected, what the salary was. Does that make sense?
Well, that could be in an ordinance, right? Wouldn't that be in an ordinance, if you wanted it?
Well, whether it was an ordinance or it was in a charter, either way, just so it's established, and we're not going, the people who are going to benefit from the increase or possibly benefit from the increase aren't actually voting on it. This way, it's in here, you get the cost of living, just like you do with Social Security every year, and there's no vote, people aren't raising their own salaries, and the bad vibes that go with it. To me, that just...
Mel, it's me. I personally, I'm leery for the council to have that in the charter. Just because if you call out, say, a CPI index, for example, a couple of years ago, we have one in our current merit increase policy, and the feds quit using that CPI. So we were able to adjust it because it wasn't in the charter. So in the charter, if you want to call out that there shall be an ordinance, and then council says, we're going to do it by CPI via ordinance, that's great. But if you put it in there and it says we're going to use the corn futures index, and the corn futures index goes away, now I've got to go back to the voters to figure out what your pay is going to be each year, based on the charter.
Well, I think that to address that, if we had in the charter that it was the CPI based on the a revision, by council of which one would be used in case the original one was discontinued.
Yeah, what I'm saying is you would do that in the ordinance.
in the
not
ordinance,
charter.
not in the charter.
So if something happens, you just have to have 2 readings in the council.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that, but I'm looking at the concept of the cost of living increase being automatic and using whichever index we're using, and that way the people that are on council don't have to vote to increase their own or potentially increase their own salary.
So again, that would be similar to the other one that would enacted by ordinance, right?
That'd be one way you could do it.
What other way would you suggest?
I was just thinking of a hybrid along these lines. This is a very important issue. I've run into the exact same thing when you lock down to a particular one and then the feds abandon an index. To thread that needle, if you wanted to put it in the charter but have an escape valve, if you will, you could have that specified and then say, or other index of inflation as set by ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, that works for me.
Kurt, does that work for you?
Yes. As long as there's an option where we don't have to have a special election and pay to have the voters come out and decide which index in the scenario that we're talking about.
So Wade, you understand where we want to go with that, and you can clean that up to incorporate that?
Sure.
Okay, anything else? I'll go through mine and then we'll go to the way down. All right, so next meetings of the city council, section 2.14. You know, we've already changed to 6 o'clock, but I don't want anything set in stone in here, meeting times, in case we change from Tuesday to Wednesday or whatever. So again, would it be by ordinance that we decide our start time and day of the week?
Frankly, it's more typical, I've seen it even by resolution.
I'm sorry?
I see it more typical by resolution, but you can do it by ordinance or by resolution.
Okay, but definitely, we want this changed, right?
Yes.
It hamstrings you.
Yes. Yeah, and we don't want that, in case something happens, 'cause we've already gone from 7 to 6, and, who knows what day or whatever, so.
Yeah, that jumped out at me
Okay.
too.
All right, so any more discussion we need on that, or you're just gonna change it to say by resolution?
Yeah, and so we're just changing the organizational meeting. That's the only one that's tied to a particular time in the charter, I believe.
Yes. Okay, so you want it made, somehow we would like this made easier in case we had to make a change, however you suggest. Okay.
But that's an important point, is this only deals with the organizational meeting, right?
I'm sorry?
I think Wade said it only deals with the organizational meeting.
I thought he said so.
Oh, okay, so,
2.14 is only, pardon me, the 7 PM appears to only be addressed to, because it says thereafter, so after the organizational meeting, city council should meet at such times as may be prescribed by resolution.
so the organizational meeting is what? The,
Organizational meeting is the first regularly scheduled meeting after the municipal election. And that's where you administer the oath of office and you elect the vice mayor.
okay, all right, and I believe we might have done, so I believe we did 6 o'clock this past November. So that's why I don't want it, I want this taken out, this 7.
Gotcha. One other thing to keep in mind, and it may be you're down to, you end up with just 4 or 5 questions, and we'll put this in there or what have you. If you end up with 10 and 12, you might decide which ones.
This isn't that important, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. Let's get it done.
I wrote myself in, now I don't know what. I had a question, and I think I talked to our city clerk, and I think I understood it better. At one time, we had a council person that could not be at a meeting. This was before COVID. So we can call in, but the only way that you can vote is if you're here in person, unless we're in a state of emergency. Is that correct?
So, let's talk about that. That is, that last part, only able to vote
Well, I mean, you
in a
could.
state of emergency. Is that because of somebody's reading of a provision in this charter, or are you talking just general state law?
I think maybe I'm just, as I drilled down, I think I was talking general, because everything changed with COVID. We were able to be on Zoom and still vote. So if we are not in a state of emergency, you must be present to vote.
So, under state law, the current guidance from the Attorney General's office, which is as good as we have, because there's no case law that drills into the particulars of this. Take COVID out of it for a second, okay? So this was the state of the guidance from the Attorney General's office prior to COVID.
Okay.
It was that a meeting could proceed if you had a quorum of the body physically in the room where the meeting's being held. Others could participate via telephone or electronic means, all right, in an extraordinary circumstance. It's very broad, usually involved health, okay? But in an extraordinary circumstance, they could not count towards establishing quorum, okay? However, the guidance from the Attorney General's office has been they could vote. However, and this is very unhelpful from the Attorney General's office, they advise against having them being the deciding vote on controversial matters. Completely unhelpful. But their guidance is they can vote. That's the current state of things.
Okay. But that's only in an emergency.
That is not an emergency.
Not emergency.
That is
Did you
non-emergency.
say something about extraordinary circumstances?
Extraordinary circumstances for that individual.
Oh, okay, got it, okay.
Yeah, sorry, thank you very
Okay,
much for
okay,
that,
all right.
to clarify. Yeah, it's extraordinary circumstances
That-
for that individual. So for example,
Yeah, yeah.
that individual is sick, would be the most common one. And by the way, that determination ultimately, again, under the guidance from the Attorney General's office, is in the reasonable discretion of the governing body physically sitting in the room.
Okay. Okay, I think those are the only ones that I had right now. Mayor, what did you have that I didn't?
My graphic arts background, can't let this go. I'll read something. Page 19, Article 7B. The last sentence says, within 60 days following the certification of the initiative petition or at any general election scheduled with 90 days. It should be within, would you correct that, please?
Where are we at? What section again?
We're on page
7.01B.
701B, last sentence.
701B, last
Should say
sentence.
within instead of
Within
with.
90 days.
60
90
days.
days.
The version I have off of Municode says within.
Mine doesn't.
What version are you working from?
I have no idea. It was,
Giordina, what
it
version?
was provided
You're
by,
getting it from the Word document from my computer.
Ah, okay.
So apparently Municode corrected the grammar for us.
It's the width before 90 days, I think, that he's looking at.
it says with.
Oh, there you go. It does say with there. Sure, we'll
Should say
find,
within.
we'll find a way to fix that.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have one issue that we had discussed a bit here before, and we said we'd bring it up in the charter. And that's the way the city is set up is a mayor, council member, and council members. One of the problems I've experienced I can pull out anything, even my badges from the city, the state-issued publications. There's a big problem in how do you say council member? Is it 2 words? Is it 1 word? I have some badges that say council member 1 word. I have others that say council member 2 words. When I go to the state and county affairs, I find that there seems to be a trend towards commissioners. There's a lot to be said for commissioners because it is clear because there's no councilman and councilwomen, which I've also experienced. So we have council member 1 word, council member 2 words, councilman, and councilwomen. Commissioner is gender specific, is gender neutral. Instead of saying, excuse the demotion, but councilwoman, it would be councilman, council member, councilwoman. I've seen that in some of the publications from the county or the state. So it seems to me like we can clear things up and get more in line with the rest of the state seems to be moving that way, which we do not have a city council, we have a commission, and we have commissioners. And that is nice and clear. You can't call it one way one time and another way another way. You can't call it council members, but then a woman gets called a councilwoman. I just think that the commissioner is so clean and that we should be moving in the direction that most of I shouldn't say most because I don't know that it's a fact, but my experience when I go to these various things is that most of the people a majority of the city representatives are commissioners.
Wait, at one time, was there a difference between council and commission, and it's now blended together? Can you give us?
Back in the 40s or 50s or something like that. There is no legal difference between, and I've run into it. You're right, a lot of people think there is a legal difference between the two, there is not.
Okay,
Whether
so
you're
with
for
that
the
being
council,
said,
commission, and so on.
is that something that we could accomplish on the charter, changing it to?
Sure, I'd probably recommend in any ballot summary that when you explain you're changing the title from city council to city commission and council member to commissioner, that it'll be.
Responsibilities,
It
yeah.
would be without any change in their duty or authority.
Okay.
Just so people are really clear.
Roles, responsibility, or
Yeah,
pay?
everything's exactly the same. It's literally just changing the name.
But I think that general neutral is important, less confusing, more consistent, and more in line with the rest of the cities.
I agree, I think just the gender neutrality, it makes it easy, it's simpler.
Okay, did you have anything else?
No, that's,
Okay. Councilman Bryan?
Yeah, I had 4 policy issues. And what I suggested is our next meeting, we also, if people have time to think about these, bring up new policy issues, if they could do that. The 4 that I think we should discuss today for the time. The first one is, we should decide whether a request for information from staff is excessive and or inappropriate.
Richard, I'm sorry, I think there's a little bit of problem understanding you.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
If you just take the second page of the handout, I'm reading directly from it. Who should decide whether a request for information from staff is excessive and or inappropriate? And that the related section is 3.06. The second one, and right now I'm not saying how I feel about them. I'm just, tabling the issue.
He's talking about 3.06.
Secondly, I think.
Just stay with this.
We should address better defining the process of a removal of a city council member, to be more consistent with, and I just put the words due process in quotes, to avoid having to
Just look at
put a lot of words in.
You don't have to turn to it.
The third issue is not currently in the charter, but would require approval of the city council, essentially over the hiring process of people that are, I'll call highly paid. I just put X dollars in here, highly compensated. And the fourth one is the number of votes to hire and fire the city manager and the city attorney. And that's sections 3.02 and 4.03.
Councilman, can you explain 3 again? So staff, what do you consider in staff? What do you want included in that, or tell me?
Anybody in the city manager's organization.
So does that mean a maintenance worker?
Depends on where you set X. Our X is a variable. It could be 75,000, could be whatever we decide. I don't think it should be a maintenance worker, if you want my opinion.
And
But this is why I want to have it compensated people.
And again, a way to, have you seen anything, again, was my feeling though, that we've given the city manager the autonomy to, to run his department, and that was including, I thought, the hirings and things too. Have you seen anywhere in any of the charters that you see that for X amount, 75,000 or above, that it did require approval, or can you tell me where we're at?
Sure. So first off, I'll tell you what you probably already know. Dealing with the city manager, council, or commission form of government is some of the most interesting stuff you ever do when you're fooling around with charters. So to the particular question, I have never seen a provision in a charter that gives basically city council overriding authority over the hiring of individuals based on a particular salary cap. I will tell you, I'm aware of one instance where, in one charter, where the hiring and firing, if I recall correctly, of department heads is subject to confirmation of the city commission. That's about the most I can recall seeing in the charters I've worked with throughout the state.
That's the
Kind of a
exception.
working into the city manager's authority. I would say, at least in the ones I've looked at, it is the exception rather than the rule.
Okay, just wanted to see, where we're on. And that one, when you talked about did you say letting go of a staff, whatever, did that?
It was
Three, 5 quorum, or do you remember what that was?
is by, actually, they just tweaked it. It's in the city of Benel. And it used to be by majority vote at a meeting. They had a meeting where there were only 4 people, only 3 people there, and I think 2 of them voted to terminate or something. I don't remember. They decided to make that 3 out of the 5.
I don't understand, you're talking about if somebody wants to fire somebody, I don't know, Mike wants to fire Tommy Smith, he's got to come to the council before he gets to.
In this instance, I'm talking about, in this instance, it's just department heads.
Department heads, so like Fred.
Okay, so he wants to fire Fred or Kurt.
Steph.
Chief, raise your hand, please.
And again, I'm only giving that as an example because I was asked.
And again, that was the exception.
I would say it's the.
I just wanted to clarify, so, Councilman Bryan, did you want to go over there, or what did you want to do with these?
I'd like to get some feedback from other council members as to maybe even the order we discuss these in. I mean, I have my opinions on each one of these. I'd like to hear some other opinions.
I'd like to chime in. I think that the way the charter currently reads adequately addresses your points, and I'll go through them one by one. This is my opinion. But the request for information, we have in the charter that you've got to go through the city manager. And that is so that way department heads or members of staff are not doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, bogging down their time, not taking care of city business. But the manager will be our, let's say, he'll open the gate to say, okay, yeah, no problem, I get to it, and we'll get it done. So I think it's got enough protection in the charter where I don't think we should mess with it. As far as the removal of council member, I read that, and I got to say, it's pretty specific, and it addresses a lot of the different issues. I think there is incorporated some due process. I would rather be judged by a group of my peers than, let's say, a tribunal of some other sort. And as far as firing the city manager and/or the city attorney, there's already a decision on the number of votes. It's 4/5. So my opinion is, unless Attorney Voss tells us there's something inherent in our charter that will create a lawsuit or a conflict or inconsistent with the ordinances, my opinion is if it ain't broken, we don't need to fix it. And so that's to adjust your suggestions. I think they're well thought out, but I don't think they need to require any kind of charter amendment.
And I'll ask everyone else's opinion, but Attorney Voss, my understanding was, and I could have been wrong, I thought we had included in your contract with your firm, was it a 30 or 60 day if you decided you didn't want us anymore, or we decided we didn't want you? So would that come to a vote, or do we just, how would that, do we actually need 4/5 to decide?
Sure. I don't remember what's in our, I mean, I'm going to tell you as a practical matter, with our office, you're not going to need 4 votes. If it's not time for us to be city attorney anymore, it's time for us to go. So as a practical matter with our office, it kind of all collapses into the same thing. with regard to if we had to go for any reason, I don't recall the exact provision. It's common that we would have a longer period of time in there, just because obviously we need to do transition with whomever.
Okay. And then, again, could you tell us your other cities that you do? So city manager, is that quorum, 4/5?
I'll tell you, that is one that is well-placed all over the place. Some of them are by, and I would recommend, and I think it is by an absolute majority. Yeah, 3 out of 5, or pardon me, 4 out of 5. But you're always looking at the whole council and voting on it. But I'd probably put it at a roughly evenly split between majority, absolute majority, and at a absolute supermajority of, say, 4/5 or 5/7 or something like that.
Councilman Frizzle, so how?
Could I-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was
Could I
going
ask
to, okay.
Mike a question, Mike, just for, if the vote was 3 and not 4, would you still feel comfortable, or would you probably just walk out the door anyway?
It would depend on the situation, quite frankly. There are some situations that may be repairable, there are some that are not. I can assure you that the ones that require a supermajority, the cities, have a much more stable management system than the ones who do not. That's about all I can add on.
Okay, Councilman Frizzle.
What was the genesis of the question?
I'm comfortable with the way it is. I was just wondering, though, if there was a vote and the vote was 3-2, I think a number of managers might walk out anyway. But as Mike said, it all depends on who the 2 were and who the 3 were, I guess. The politics.
So sometimes when you just have a simple majority, it creates one person who can become the swing vote on everything.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to a supermajority where you really don't have that.
I think if you're getting rid of the city manager, it should be a supermajority of the 4.
Forgive me for my naivety coming in here, but I did not realize, and again, mea culpa, I did not realize that this had to go. Did anybody else not realize this had to go before a vote and election?
Oh, I knew that, yeah.
You made a charter change?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Okay. So good. I am loath to change anything, given that backdrop. I think when you signal to the voters that you want to shoot the city manager 3-2 instead of 4-1, that raises questions of the council looking to shoot the city manager. That's the first thing I would think of if I'm a voter. Again, that's just me. I'm just a simple guy, but that's what I would think of. And it would just appear to me that, again, this is our Constitution. We have to be very careful with what we go to the voters to, because I think in a certain sense, we're tipping our hand, whether it's increasing our own salaries or et cetera, et cetera. So I would really, unless it's something that, the house is on fire and we don't have a house that's on fire, I think we would leave it alone. The one thing that I think I would like to see, it doesn't necessarily have to go, it could be a gentleman's or a lady's agreement. I am uncomfortable, Mike, with you or anybody, not picking on you, but anybody in your situation who can fire a department head. I would be appalled if I found out it's a Monday morning and on Tuesday I'm playing tennis and Marilyn Wheeler says, "Do you know that Mike fired Kurt?" I'm like, "What?" Hold on, what? Mike fired the chief. I just think that, in my opinion, I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but that sets up a situation, and I'm going to just spell it out because I can't believe I wouldn't get your approval on this. You've put Kurt as the heir apparent. and maybe you don't want to retire, and I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking. Yeah, I'm just saying, this council's going to go. You're going to go off into the sunset one day. We're all not going to be here, and it would just seem to me that the council should have a heads up when you're about to fire a direct report. I cannot, and I just see a situation. I'm getting blindsided where all of a sudden, Ellen comes home and says, "Holy cow, did you know Fred just got," and I'm picking up the phone going, "Mike, what the hell happened?" Well, there was fraud. He tried to steal. I didn't have the time. And I get all that to a certain extent, but in my humble opinion, I'm just speaking for myself, I really would like a heads up if you're going to take one of your department heads out.
In 30 years of doing, 30 plus years of doing this, I've had to fire 2 department heads, basically. Not here in yours, but 2 department heads.
Give your mayor, if I may, did you give the mayor?
And both were done with the consent and blessing of the city council.
So Councilman Frizzlin, I want to clarify, are you saying, Councilman Frizzlin? Councilman Frizzlin, so I'm asking you, are you asking for approval or heads up? Like there's a difference. Are you saying that he's going to reach out to you and say, Rick, I've been having some problems. I've documented, I've talked to him. I don't feel that he's the right person for this job. Or are you saying, Rick, I need your approval to let him go?
I think,
At least notification of the circumstances, right? And department heads get some measure, a little bit more measure of protection in the charter than.
Again, it would seem to me you would want, it doesn't have to be approval like, you're coming to mommy and daddy asking for the car keys, but I would think if you're in a situation where Kurt did something, and I'm personalizing it, Kurt did something where you're uncomfortable. He dated an employee, he did something of that nature where, people are now raising their eyebrows. Maybe you would want to come to, call Mike up and say, this is the situation. Hey, King Wasabi, what would you do in my position? This is what I want to do. You okay with that? What do you think? I would just think something along those lines would be necessary to take out a department head. In my view, I would, to be perfectly candid with you, Mike, I would expect a phone call from you that says, hey, sit down, get a cup of coffee, and let's talk this through. I've got a problem, Rick, and I really would like to need your help, and I'm going to make, I've already talked to the mayor. Obviously, your first call would be to Nancy, but I just think, I don't want to get blindsided, Mike. I don't want to be walking on the tennis court and having somebody tell me that, one of my key executives got shot. And, okay, fine. So I've said my.
Can I ask you a question about the Florida
Somewhat.
Sunshine Law? My understanding is that personnel issues, we can have a closed meeting.
That is not correct.
I don't need a close, but what I'm saying is, what I would do is, the first question I would ask you is, did you talk to the mayor? The first question I would ask, and what did she say? She gave her blessing she really thinks that's probably more than enough for me, because at least somebody else, but again, my feeling is, I'm not looking to, tell you can't take the car out on Friday. What I'm looking for is not to get blindsided and look like an idiot while I'm walking down the street, or I'm in Publix, or I'm on the tennis court.
So is that more of a policy than something, just maybe an understanding?
I will tell you that is pretty much the uniform policy in any cities I see. And ultimately, that kind of goes to the relationship between the council and the city manager, to have an understanding at the very least the city manager is going to give you a heads up and explain his reasoning to the folks he works for.
And I would feel the same way as the
Drops
council.
a hammer like that.
Could you just clarify one thing from my edification? Is labor negotiations different than personnel issues?
It is, unfortunately. Yeah, I was going to mention that. Labor negotiation is dealing with an organized union.
Okay.
And then, and on particular things with regard to negotiating the contract or things relating to that. Personnel issues, unfortunately, there is not a blanket sunshine law
You
exemption.
said no, I figured that was the
And,
difference. I just wanted to make sure.
Councilman Brandt, so what else would you like to, tell us about your reasoning for this, or?
Well, which one? Let's talk about the number of votes for hiring and firing. Right now, the way it reads, it's four to hire and 4 to fire.
Is that 3.02 or 4.03?
302 and 403. It's the same for both the city attorney and the city manager. The previous city attorney said, surprisingly enough, that it should only take 3 votes to fire the city attorney. And I think Wade is implying that it probably, you know, as a practical matter, we're going to take 3 votes. In terms of removing a council member, it only takes 3 votes, it doesn't take 4. So I think that the city manager and the city attorney serve at the pleasure of the city council, which is the majority of the city council.
So, I mean, can I go, Madam Mayor?
Yes, yes.
So
yes.
I do agree with I think, in my view, we should be consistent. I don't think we should be allowed to fire a city attorney or a council commissioner. You see, I just did gender.
Yeah, you already
I started
assumed the cell.
because but the city manager, we have to do it 4-1. Why don't we just make it 4-1 across the board? And again, to Mike's point, you can't gang up on somebody, you know, I mean, there is something to be said that one person is always in the middle because of I mean, it doesn't happen on this council, but I'll be candid, it happened on the last, you know, I mean, I was here for it. I mean, I wasn't on the council, but this council is very different than the last council. Not to say one is better than the other, but there was definitely, you know, you could definitely get somebody out with 3 votes on the last council, and I just think let's just be consistent and make it 4-1.
Well, we can point out one thing. On the one case, you've got 5 people voting, so it's taken 4 out of 5. When a council member is up for removal, you only have 4 people. So you'd have to have 100% of the people to remove them. Where 3 out of 4 is still a supermajority.
Bingo. That's the sensibility behind it. Makes sense.
Well, the previous city attorney now said that the person could vote.
Well, you can't be consistent, Richard.
No,
when you
he's
got-
saying that the person could vote, so if it was me you were trying to remove, I get a vote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's what he
That
said.
makes
That makes
sense.
total sense.
So I get a vote whether I go or not.
Can we guess which way you're gonna vote?
There are 3 provisions to that charge section. 3 or 4 to hire and 4 to fire.
Correct.
And I can assure you, as a manager going into a situation, if I had a 3-2 vote to come here, I wouldn't be here.
That was the point I was trying to make.
So keep it,
Recruiting,
you can,
yeah.
keep it consistent. That was the
Yeah.
rationale, to give you a historical
Well, that's a
perspective.
good
That
point,
was the
yeah. Makes sense.
rationale
It
back
makes
in
total sense, it makes total
2012.
sense. Good.
Okay, anyone, the other ones that you want?
Rick, what were you saying about 3? I mean, you're saying we should require
He's asking you a question.
some
Oh, I'm
type of
sorry.
approval authority?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear a word you said. I apologize, I just didn't hear you, I wasn't paying attention, I'm
Number
sorry.
3.
Number 3.
It sounded like you were saying,
No, what I'm comfortable with is.
You didn't address that at all, you were only addressing
Yeah,
number 4.
Yeah, I addressed number 4. I don't think I don't want to bother the voters with number 3. And number 4, we've already got a understanding that a firing of a direct report that Mike or whomever is in that position would make phone calls before they took out a department head.
yeah, that's number 3. It's related to number 3.
Yeah, it's part and parcel, yes, it's part and parcel of the same thing. But again,
Number 4, you were saying you thought that you should be consistent, but to make it consistent, it should take 4 people for a city council.
But Mel just pointed out that it's 4 by definition.
Excuse me?
Mel's pointed out that it's 4 by
No, it's
definition.
not.
Yes, it is, it's 4. Yes, it is. According to Mel, it's,
Now, Richard, let's clarify, are you saying about the city manager, or are you saying one of us? What are we talking about? 4 for the city
I'm
manager?
saying my position is, for the city attorney and the city manager, I think it should be 3 to hire and 3 to fire. And for the city council, the one council member up on charges, I heard Rick say he thought it should, if we're going to keep the 4 to hire and 4 to fire, for the other 2, on charges against the city council member, it should take 4 people as well.
Well, my point is that we talked about a supermajority to fire the city manager, and that's 4 out of 5. To remove a member, you only have 4 voting members of the council. And 3 out of 4 is a supermajority. That was my point.
I think they clarified though, Mel, that the person would still have a vote, so it would be
Well,
five
If the
out,
person has a vote, then it should be 4.
4 out of 5.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, so then it would be consistent, so then city manager, city attorney, and member of council would be 4.
And the other thing is, with putting charges against the city council members, you're basically overcoming an election. Whereas when you hire a city manager or city attorney, they serve at the pleasure of either the majority or supermajority.
So I want to be clear here. I want to make sure that I'm going to defer to everybody. I'm not going to throw my body in front of this. My feeling is that given what I've seen, not on this council, but given what I've seen in the past, and I've been to, was at every council meeting, so were you, and we saw what we saw. And I don't want to bring up, but to Mike's point and to his credit, it is easy to gang up on somebody. If you've got the right, it's not hard to gang up on somebody, and getting 3 votes and costing somebody their job, I think is not fair. I think if somebody is not doing their job, it should be 4-1, and people can't collaborate as easily to get somebody removed. So I just think to make it easy, it should be 4-1, whether you are a city manager, city attorney, or a commissioner. Again, if the math doesn't work out and Mel's, countering me and saying, well, but that's just my feeling, is just to make it consistent and make it 4. That way, again, you have to think this is the Constitution. You have to think about going forward. If you get another council in here that are, all best friends and best buds, and they don't follow the sunshine laws, and they're talking like crazy, and the phone is burning up, it's easy to gang up on a attorney or a city manager or a fellow councilman. It's very easy. And I just think that, we're elected. Mike, the city manager, is in a very high level job. The city attorneys, you're coming here based on good faith. I would take any collaboration or the ability to go into cahoots, let's call it what it is, to get rid of somebody for whatever reason. That's my only point.
Rick, I agree totally if the council member who is on trial is allowed to vote. The only reason I said that was because I did not think the person on trial was allowed to vote, which would mean only 4 people were voting, and then in that case, 3 would be a supermajority. If the council member is allowed to vote, my argument is nil. I agree with you 100%.
And do we have the answer for that, so we can,
gang up on
Randy gave us an answer back.
and Lonnie said all 5 can vote?
Yeah.
Attorney Carey, do you agree with that?
Slimy.
Wade, do you know the answer?
I can give you a couple things. First, in reviewing this provision, there is nothing in here that says they can't vote. I've seen forfeiture trial provisions that specifically say they're not allowed to vote.
As it's not addressed, you feel that it,
Yeah, the only exception to that, and I'm pretty sure where I'd need to look, is Division on Ethics, or Commission on Ethics opinions. The reason why is whether or not the commission has found voting on one of those to be a voting conflict under the relevant provision in Chapter 112. I don't believe they have. I can double check on that. But I would go with what you have previously been told at this point. And if we find differently, I'll let you know.
okay. But your understanding was 5. Okay, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I guess I just actually respectfully disagree with Councilman Politis that it does define due process in a way. It pretty much, the way it's stated, if people want to go after, if 4 people want to go after the council member, they don't have to have a very good reason to do it. And I think at the very least, if they go after somebody and that person is not council, it still causes that person a lot of expense and a lot of time. And somebody should have to compensate, whether it's the city or the city council or some combination of the two. That's the way I feel about it. And, so that's,
He was.
So what do we need to change about that? Because, you know, again, as Councilman Frizzalone said before, you know, there might have been something that happened in the past that, you know, leaves a taste in someone's mouth. What can we do? Again, I'm gonna ask your expertise.
It's
Ours not
that,
strict
it's for-
enough, or, yeah.
It's
you
for
can-
other council, you know, I mean, we're not gonna be here, for, you know, there'll be 5 other people here. I mean, you don't want anybody to be able to gang up on somebody. And I just think that's, you know, whether it be a city manager or a city attorney or a city council member, no one should be able to go into collaboration to get rid of somebody. That's just my feeling. And getting 4 votes is much more, I mean, Mike is right. It's pretty easy to swing 2 people. It's very hard to swing 3.
Well, they would.
I can tell you,
That's okay.
I've looked at a lot of these provisions, the forfeiture of office with a kind of a mini trial type thing before in a number of different charters. I will tell you, this is actually the most elaborate that I've ever seen. That expressly go into, you know, what the standard is, competent substantial evidence, that it's appealable to the circuit court. That's the law anyway, but it expressly lays it out here. And it lays out the bases on which it can be made, and it lists out words that have very well-defined meanings in Florida case law. And I would suggest to you, this, if you get too much into the weeds of what could constitute and not constitute it, this is where we might fall into the trap of restating Florida law poorly. Because we've got a number of words that you find that have been developed in case law over time for municipal recall statute, as well as gubernatorial suspension and removal. This list is roughly the same list of bases.
So this is more detailed than you've seen.
It tends to be, actually. And it provides, I mean, actual notice and opportunity to be heard with actual rock-solid time periods. I'll tell you, a lot of other ones I've read, and again, doesn't mean it's the best in the world, but compared to the other ones I've seen, this has very rigorous procedural due process.
I don't think anybody is disagreeing with that at all. I think the question is, for me, again, I could be way off base here. The question becomes, if you only need 3 council members, I'm sorry. If you only need 3 council members to indict another council member, and you go through the process, that council member has to go out and hire an attorney and pay that attorney. So regardless of how good this is, I've got to, if 3 council members decide to gang up on me because they don't like me for whatever reason, I then have to go to council, again, if he's not here, I have to call his law firm and say, I need you to defend me. That costs money.
Absolutely.
So if in fact the council doesn't go through and be able to take that that male or that female out, right? They're going for the gun and they fall short. I think that attorney Politis should be able to go back to the city and say, hey, you went for the gun, you didn't get him, you reimburse the costs. Because I can tell you that's how it works in condo law. If somebody sues the HOA, or if the HOA, they have the right to get the attorney fees back, or we have the right to get our attorney's fees back if in fact they fail. So I think that's the point. Again, it's another deterrent for having them gang up, because now the city has to say to themselves, the council have to say, okay, if we lose, not only do we have egg on our face, but we've got to reimburse for the attorney. That's all there is. I can't make it any more simple than that. It's just a question of having a level of deterrence. And frankly, again, I don't want to, I am telling you that I saw what I saw. So, I mean, there are other people, I mean, the mayor saw what she saw. I mean, we saw it with our own very eyes. So that should not happen. If somebody is that egregious and has done something that harmful to the city, you better damn well have your case and your ducks in a row so you can get rid of that person, period, paragraph, end of story. That person's gone. And if they're still hanging out because you couldn't do it, and all you did was make that guy's life miserable or a gal's miserable, you should have to pay for it.
Please don't, but when my saying there's a lot of due process going on in here, please don't take that as an argument against, for example, the idea of changing it from 3 to 4.
And that's what I'm saying.
It's
And money matters because money matters because I'll tell you, people are even in he knows, there was this big clash between, the X-Men and this, and we had it in this town. So you could easily say, you know what, I know that if you're a person who doesn't like this administration and we're running, I know that I'm not going to beat the mayor in a run, and I know I'm not going to beat Councilman Frizzlone or I'm not going to really beat them. But you know what? I'm going to throw my hat into the ring just to make them spend money, just to make them go from building to building to campaign and campaign, just to make their life miserable. Because, well, I don't like them very much, and they can, and there's nothing we can do about that. But we can't prevent a council from attacking somebody and making them have to go into their pocket for car costs and all of the attorney's fees. And again, I just think a kinder, gentler approach is better than not.
Well, this city has, I can give you a concrete example of what you described earlier. I don't know if you remember this or not, you may not. In 1997, there was a recall election for Phyllis Garden. That predated me. The recall was appealed by Phyllis Garvin, acting as her own attorney, all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, I think, ruled against her, and she ended up having to file an appeal, but she had to hire an appeals attorney. At that point, she sued the city after much due process, and the city actually settled and paid her attorney.
Yeah.
She didn't get much out of it at the end of the day, and the recall didn't hold up, but we had since had at least 2 elections after that, so she really couldn't be reinstated in office. So she lost reputation-wise, but she didn't lose financially.
And again, I don't think, again, in this council, based upon the fact that we've been together now for 3 years, I don't see any, that's not going to be, the issue is other councils and what we've seen in the past. I just want, nobody should be allowed to gang up on anybody. That's my point, whether it's a city manager.
Precedents going
That's
forward.
right. Nobody should be able to gang up on you, Mike, and nobody should be able to gang up on you, and nobody should be able to gang up on one of us. It should, we really have to, be very, very careful with that. Groupthink, mindsets take a course of their own, and I think we should protect each other's jobs and make sure that if we're going to take somebody out, that we're doing it for all the right reasons. And that's just my feeling.
So with that being said, do we need anything changed in 2.04?
Yes.
I think it's the discussion is change the 3 to 4 members.
That and the reimbursement will have to be in there.
Let me mention something about the reimbursement, okay? Just because I tend to shy away from putting entitlements to the taxpayers' money into charters in all instances, okay?
I think that makes sense.
And that's my only concern there, because in that instance there, the current substantive law of the state of Florida, I don't know the particulars of that circumstance, but basically, if you go through a recall or similar processes, and you have to defend because it's based on something you were doing on behalf of the city and you were wrongfully attacked for it, those are the bases upon which you typically can come and try to recover from a municipality your attorney's fees in doing that. So that covers a lot, but not all circumstances. So,
If I may, I agree with you 100%. I think if you change it from 3 to 4, I think that's more than enough protection, and that alleviates the city from having the taxpayers have to pay for something that they shouldn't. So I am completely supportive of what you're saying.
Wade, the difference between things that Mike stated, that was a citizen's recall.
Sure.
It wasn't the city council
But Wade's point is well taken, Richard.
Yeah,
I mean,
mine-
I agree with him 100%. We should not be putting the taxpayer, if you change it from 3 to 4 and somebody, you do get the 4 votes, then the person's basically gone. And at the end of the day, I think that's enough protection for everybody who ever serves on a council, whether it's this council or the councils going forward. And that's enough firepower. And I do think that we should back off from putting taxpayer money at risk.
Yeah, I think that if you put anything in writing that the city is going to reimburse, that's a pleading guilty right off the bat, and it's an invitation for somebody to come and look for the deep pockets that the city has, so that's my opinion.
I think I actually like what you just said a lot.
Yeah,
Well,
so do I.
this is a semi-facetious comment. I'd rather see the council members responsible than the city that brought it and failed. But
That's ridiculous, Richard. That's punitive, Richard, that's punitive. I don't think we need to go there.
Not gonna happen.
But anyway, I know that's not going to fly, so do we have a consensus that we change that from 3 to 4?
I'm fine with that.
I think we did.
I'll agree to that as long as we don't have to deal with the other ones, because I think the other ones,
Well, let me talk about one since I haven't talked. In my opinion, the city council should be the final determiner of whether a request is inappropriate or excessive. And, you can take some extreme cases. Let's say there's fraud going on. If the city council member wants to investigate that, there's going to be a lot of pushback from staff and/or the city manager. And I think the city manager should have, if he thinks something is excessive, he should come to the city council and see whether they will support him or not.
yeah, but don't you think that city council person is going to come to the city council as well?
Right.
So I don't think that we should, again, I don't like the idea of 5 of us bothering staff with whatever we think individually is important, that we think we need the information, we think we're entitled to it. It should go through a filter process by going to the city manager. And if it's something that's not all that big of a deal, or he feels, we got time, we can do it, he'll do it. And if he doesn't, he'll give you his reasons, and then we, as individual city councilmen, come up and say, Madam Mayor, I wanted this request for information. It was denied by the city manager. He said it wasn't important or reasonable. I'm asking my fellow city council, will you pass a resolution that allows me to get this information? And then we can rule on it. But I don't want to change, again, if it's not broken, I don't want to fix it.
Yeah, I think we do have, and I think you do have recourse. I think Councilman Paulides is correct. If you see something, or if anybody sees something that is inappropriate, that's going, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be for whatever it is, I think at that time, you address it at the council meeting, and all you need to do is get 3 votes, and we go investigate it. So I think you're completely, and the council is completely protected if you see something that you don't like whatever it is, whether it be organization structure, or whether it be the way people are being managed, or whether it be, it could be a host of things that is really, you think that is really, causing damage. You bring it up here, and if you get 2 more votes, we investigate it, and we'll make a decision at the time. So I think I really like the way Councilman Paulides just phrased it. I think we have to have the courage to be able to say at a council meeting, this is what I think, this is what I feel, and I would like your approval to be able to investigate it. And I think that's our recourse.
Yeah, we're paying people to do research or whatever that one person feels important, but maybe the others don't. So I agree with what Rick is saying. Let's discuss it here, and if you get the votes, fine. If you don't get the votes, we move on.
So I'm understanding that if there's a certain report, explain that to me a little bit more. So there's a certain report that I want, and, I go through Mike, and he's saying he doesn't think that's appropriate. You're saying come here, or that's not necessary?
No, I think it's not about an individual thing. It's about a total quantity of requests for what is considered way too much. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, and I want that. So if it is appropriate, then make your case to the city council, and the city council will direct the city manager to do it. Otherwise, we have to let the city manager run the city.
You know, and I tend to agree. I think I'm up there more than, you know, anyone else, and I think we have a pretty lean staff, you know, that a lot of times doesn't have the bandwidth, you know, to be changing, you know, this is something I have to get done and go there. So, so that's why I think the city manager has the final decision, with, you know, knowing his staff, how much time that they have. But I agree too, if it's something
Well,
that.
yeah,
that
bring
we-
the case,
yeah.
bring any problems that you have before city council, and we'll make a judgment on it. And we'll either agree with you or the city manager, or find a middle ground.
All right,
Does that work?
just wanted to make my views known.
Okay. Okay, so we're getting close. I know you have a hard stop. I don't know if you, everybody here knew it or not. I was asked for a recommendation for your law firm for South Daytona, and I understand that you did win that, and you're now their city attorney. You need to be there at 6, correct?
That's correct.
Congratulations.
Great, great. So I know that you have to leave here in a little bit. So-
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, that keeps you in this area.
Exactly. Running back and forth over the bridge.
Right, so yeah, over the bridge is a bigger thing. Okay, so looking this over, is there anything else? So I think each one of us called out what we saw. Again, I'm not the expert at this at all. I read some of this stuff over and over again. And what else would you say, anything else that caught your eye, that you have a question, why did we do it that way?
Mayor, do you mind if I throw something out there
Sure.
for consideration? The filling of vacancies provision, which is 2.05, this is the one that really gives me heartburn, because I believe that this provision obligates the city, if certain conditions are met, to holding a special election, and therefore obligates the city to pay for it. And essentially it provides that if the city, if there's a vacancy, the city council, the remaining members, would have the opportunity to fill the position within 30 days. But if they don't, and they're deadlocked, because say it's a 2-2 vote, because you only have 2 members, or 4 remaining members, then it obligates you to call a special election to fill the vacancy. And then further, after that, if it says if the city council fails to provide for an election in this timeframe, such election may be ordered by any court of competent jurisdiction. And I'm not sure how you get to that point, because it just kind of says the court may order it, but how does the court get there? I mean,
All right, so Attorney Carey, explain that to me then. So anyway, I decide to go back to Georgia and I'm resigning.
Right.
Okay, so, well, let's not say me, let's say Mel, because I know, you know, the vice mayor would act. Okay, so one of the council member resigned. So tell me what the next step is, how we fill that vacancy?
the next step is that you would fill it by whatever process you come up with at the next meeting, presumably, to determine who should be the next member. So you, as the collective body or committee, would be able to vote on.
So John Brown, I know, has an interest in it, and we present John Brown, or how,
Right.
what about
So,
if 3
well,
people have an interest?
The charter's kind of open-ended on that, which I think is appropriate, because you want to be able to allow the city manager to work with you and figure that out, and every situation might be a little different. You know, so I'm not suggesting you should have more onerous procedures in here. What I'm suggesting is that if the council's deadlocked, let's say there's a 2-2 vote, and nobody wants to give in, nobody wants to flip and be the third vote for one person, then it requires a special election to be held.
So you're
Can I
trying,
recommend that we make the city manager break the tie?
That would be appropriate.
Isn't a situation like that normally,
Sorry,
a coin flip?
I mean, theoretically, that's how you could do it if it was in the charter, but it's not in the charter that way. The charter provides a process, which is, if you can't agree on a member to fill this interim position, then it would, a special election would be called.
so you're trying to save us, is this what your bottom line is? You're trying to save us having to go to a special election and
Correct.
pay that
Or
amount?
a coin flip?
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
and then, or save you from having to get sued and a circuit court judge ordering a special election because you don't do it in the prescribed amount of time.
Okay, so what do we need to do to change this charter, this 2.05?
Coin flip.
I-
NFL draft.
I know, right? Coin flip is typically how you handle when you have an election tie. In Florida law, you do it by lots, which is by whatever random means you do, and you might do a coin flip or whatever. Here, you might have 3 people, 4 people. Everybody wants to appoint their own person. You don't have anybody anywhere near a majority. So you're going to want some affirmative means. What I would suggest is, when I was looking over various drafts of this, I think this exact provision was amended back in 2015, based on what I have. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Does that ring a bell, that it was amended? Okay, because when I looked at the older version, it had one that basically said you would fill it until it didn't call for a special election and spending the money for it. Let me suggest this. Let me take a look at that prior provision, and then we can take a look at both of them and see if it solves this problem, or if it created other problems, or what have you, and then we can get into the particulars on it, because...
Okay. I don't want to put our city clerk on the spot, and I see our city manager walked out, but I would have liked the reasoning why from 2015.
And we can track that. We can try to get
I
some...
would like to know why,
Get that
what
and-
compelling reason did you have at that time? Okay.
Absolutely.
Lonnie made the change. Lonnie made the change. I can tell you that. That's all.
Without.
We'll dig into it a little bit further.
We
See what we
appreciate
got.
that. Okay, so with, getting close to wrapping up, thank you, Carrie, for bringing that up. I guess I'll ask you too. You're pretty familiar with, what we have here now. What do you see that might be something you would look into as well?
That was the big one for me, just because it seems like the charter is obligating the council to spend money if certain conditions are met, which I don't think is a place you would want to be with your city charter. But I'll leave that to your good judgment. And that's the one that really touched on it.
Did you have another one that just kind of maybe?
No, nothing that wasn't already mentioned. I mean, the 7 o'clock meeting one was because, I think, we
Right.
ran into that a few months
Right.
ago.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Anyone else want to?
right now.
What about all the words that have been produced about harmonizing the ordinances with the, have you read through some of all this stuff?
I have, yeah. So there was a document that Lonnie Groot, I believe, had produced in the past. It had a lot of extensive cutting out. And I'll tell you what I would suggest the philosophy that may have underlay that. There's a lot of stuff in this charter that is not strictly necessary for it to be there to be effective. All right? It's very common, actually, to state a bunch of things that effectively is all the powers that you as the governing body already have. All right? And a lot of that was cleaning it up, paring it down, which is a good principle to have, but quite frankly, another principle I tend to adhere to is if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So I did not get into a lot of looking to rip a bunch of stuff out just because you could rip it out for the heck of it. Making it consistent with ordinances, that is a broad header. And we heard one example of that today where we have an apparent issue as between the charter provision about how we set your salaries and an ordinance that's been put in there, how you set your salaries. I'm going to, between now and your next workshop, I'm going to drill down a little bit more with staff to get their other examples of
That
where
was
they've
I
seen
would know more.
these two things crash into each other. And it may be we have 1 or 2, maybe we have 3 or 4. And then I can come back to you and come back with suggestions of which one should give in the long run.
So right now, the way we're looking at it, it doesn't look like we have an excessive amount that Lisa's going to say, no, you can't do that. I mean,
Everything I'm seeing right now doesn't look like it'd be an incredibly long list.
Well, let me ask this question. Have you looked at this work enough to know roughly what percentage has to do with harmonizing ordinances and what percentage has to do with just cutting words out of the charter?
No. I mean, I've looked at it 5 or 6 times, but you can't know that just by looking at it itself, because a lot of what he did was cut. And so I
And actually, by memory, it seems like he had more words than were in the charter. I mean, it was very, very wordy.
But, yeah, I will dig a little deeper in getting those specific examples of where the two clash from staff, because they're going to know where the rubber hits the road on that, and then be able to come back to you all with some suggestions on that.
Okay, so next steps for next meeting is whatever suggestions you brought up, whatever we've talked about, whatever Attorney Carey, you're going to come back with the actual words, or what are we doing at the next meeting?
Yeah, actually, this has been a very productive discussion. I'll tell you what, this oftentimes takes 3 or 4 meetings to get out where you guys have already gotten. I think by your next meeting, since it's going to be about a month from now, you should be able to come back with, at least on a number of these with proposed charter amendments, even with potential ballot language, just so you have something to work with. No reason to draw it out any further. I can come back with that, just so you all have something to work with and play with. And I can come back with any additional suggestions I have for finding conflicts between the charter and the ordinances, and go from there. And then any additional things that may come to you in looking at the charter, we can have further discussion on that at that time.
So trying to schedule for next month, do you think we need the whole 2 hours that we've scheduled right here, or should we do an hour and a half, and then?
Glad to make it shorter if,
Shorter the better.
We have
15
someone-
minutes would be great.
Is that fine? I don't want to cut you short, but I feel like we've accomplished a lot today. Do you want to stay?
I'd probably put it at, I agree, 15, 20 minutes would be great.
I just have the five. I'm the one that hates the workshops the most. The mayor knows that, so I just making a joke. But
I'd
15
probably
minutes would
say,
be
just so we can dig in and fool around, if we've happen to have ballot language on them and so on, I'd probably just say an hour.
Oh, okay.
And we could do that. And again, if we run out of time,
Then we'll go
if
to-
you all, and if, keep in mind that, and I'm not suggesting you take this out for many, many months. There's no reason to do the exercise for no good reason. But if you were going to put it on a ballot that is already going to be printed and not pay any additional money, we're going to do this good work, and it's going to sit on a shelf for a number of months before it finally gets on a ballot in 2022.
Oh,
That will be here sooner than you think, scarily enough. But nevertheless, we've got time.
Okay. Good. Well, we thank you very much for today. I
Yeah,
feel like it was a very
you did a really good
productive,
job.
very productive meeting that everyone, got to say their piece, and we appreciate you leading us there. So,
Absolutely.
So, all right, we'll tell Mayor Hall that I said hello. And I think if there's no other questions? Okay, nothing else, then I'll end this. Thank you.
Thank you all.
That went pretty fast.
Very nice.